Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. This is part 2 of our look at Phoenix Nights, Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights. If you haven't already, do please go back and listen to part 1 because we're well into it. We're talking about a particular episode at Singles Night, and we've already dealt with most of Peter Kay's backstory. We haven't talked about Dave Spikey or Neil Fitzmaurice in any detail yet, but that's just about to come up, so I won't keep you waiting. Let's get right into it now.
So Brian and Beverly have hit it off, and he asks her out. Or he sort of stumblingly moves towards asking her out, and then I think she sort of steps in and actually asks him out. But it's kind of cute. It's nice. It's cute.
Ah, man, I really like Joanne Wright. I think she does a great job here. Like this, she plays that sort of timid character so well, and. Yeah. You know, they've done the hair and the glasses, and she looks she looks like a librarian, doesn't she? Like in a comedy sense. She does very little. Like, she doesn't say much. Like, she doesn't have a lot of lines, and
she doesn't have a lot to do, really.
But it works so well. But yeah, let's do it in order. Let's do the montage first, because that's kind of what we get next.
All right. Montage. So the first scene is they're feeding the ducks.
Yeah.
So I don't know why, but he's just throwing entire slices of bread at the ducks, which I enjoyed. That was good. What's the second one?
Bowling.
In
which she sort of pushes him up and then accidentally unleashes him down the aisle.
Yeah, much hilarity. Then there's paintballing, so we see her sort of hiding behind a tree and emerging, pointing the gun, and then we cut to Brian, who's just sat in his wheelchair in full camouflage outfit and a helmet on, and he's just getting smashed with paintballs.
Sat in his wheelchair in the middle of a wood, where he obviously can't move anywhere. That's a little triptych joke of there's three things of it, like where would they go on dates and becoming increasingly ridiculous. Why would they go paintballing? But it reminded me of listening to one of the writers, I can't remember even who it was who said it, but basically they said they wanted it to be like Airplane, just layered with gags. So, you know, it's not just, oh, here's a funny character, here's some dialogue. The poster in the background has a gag on it about something.
Yeah, very good.
And this scene really made me think of like something you would see in Airplane, like a little montage sequence where it's just increasingly ridiculous, and it goes to the point where it's almost like a spoof type thing. So that really made me think of that. And then it goes to them.
We get a classic Brian Potter moment here. So they're in a restaurant, romantic candlelit dinner, and the woman comes over with some roses, and we just hear, "Rose for the lady," and he just looks at her and goes, off. And which is beautiful in its simplicity and very funny because he deadpans it, just absolute no malice in it, just not interested.
Although you notice Joanne Wright turns round to sort of look, and she's
absolutely creasing up and she's corpsed. Yeah, she's completely broken.
And then we get the karaoke bit, or Jerryoke. We get Brian, your very own Brian Potter, the club secretary, and he's doing a turn on the karaoke, and he dedicates it to Beverly. You are the wind beneath my wheels.
I can fly higher than an eagle, 'cause you are the wind beneath my wheels.
Brian's no better singer than Jerry.
Well, that works so well because Joanne Wright is crying, and it's such an emotion, but it works so well because it's a ridiculous sort of thing, but you still feel like there's a genuine emotion there because of her response.
Yeah. And we cut to the next day, and Brian's there's upbeat backing music. Brian's in a good mood. He's dancing in his chair. He's in such a good mood, he puts money in the blind boy, which is it's amazing. Normally he shakes the blind boy and
Corfu for Christmas.
Then we have this lovely scene in the toilets where him and Jerry are in the gents. What do you do, Jerry?
I'm a compare. This is a nice little scene, actually, where, you know, there's a vulnerability from Brian that we don't see very often. And he's, you know, I think he can be that with Jerry, where he probably can't be with anyone else. Where he kind of, he's
well, you say that, Alan, but you're right. He shows some vulnerability here. Can you think of another example of him doing it in the whole series? I can't.
No.
I think this is a really interesting scene.
Yeah, he's an abrasive person who, he presents this force. Because even when he's being vulnerable, like, for example, at the start of Series 2, where he's kind of presenting himself as like, oh, I need your help, I need you. He's doing it as a
he's still bullying.
Performative sense of, you forcing them to empathise with him so that they have to help. But yeah, this is a genuine kind of moment of like, I don't know what to do with the ladies. And the fact that he's gone to Jerry for help is probably telling.
And this is a beautiful writing trick. We get this enormous monologue from Jerry, which is completely muffled by the non-Dyson Airblade. Yeah. And there's just that great punchline as the airdryer turns off and he goes,
"Oven in piss."
I do like that. It just lingers on Brian's face as he wonders what he possibly might have said.
Very good, very good.
It is nice.
Anyway, the reason he's showing this vulnerability is because he knows that Beverly is coming round tonight, and this could be it. Tonight's the night.
And so we get the scene, the date. Beverly at Brian's house. We get to see we get to see Brian's front room.
Well, before you even move on, I have made lots of notes about Brian's front room. Did you check out the decor in Brian's front room? It's incredible.
It's an interesting one because it's clearly not well designed for someone in a wheelchair. It's a lot of small spaces and carpets and rugs and stuff like that. But it's obviously it's not a set, it's an actual house that they got in. But yeah, is it an Elvis clock?
He's got an Elvis clock, and the Elvis's legs are swinging as a pendulum. Like the three-piece suite is this sort of flock pattern with a matching lampshade. The carpet's like really loud, flowery pattern, and there's a kind of dirty pink rug by the fireplace, which is absolutely gross.
Yeah.
A very old-fashioned fireplace with a ceramic dog on the hearth. You see the ceramic dog? Now, we used to have one of those when I was little. Do you remember that, or was that before your time?
A bit before my time.
We had one of those when I was very small. And of course, you've got a jukebox in the corner, which is great because it's sort of like hidden in the corner behind a chair.
Yeah.
Motown special. Got that from the States. America.
What's interesting about this is a house, and I'm curious as to how much they've put into it. I don't think they've gone and let's find a house with a jukebox. So
I think they found an old lady's house and put things in it.
Yeah, it must be, right? But I know this for a fact because in the audio commentary on it, they mentioned that the reason this scene is shot quite simply is because they were running out of time. They had to get out of this house, like whoever's house it was.
Okay.
They didn't have much time. So you'll notice this scene is largely a kind of one big wide on the two of them, with a few cut-ins, but it is very simply shot by relative even to the standards, which is not exactly a high octane edit. But it means they only had a couple of takes. It's looser because there's no kind of cut points. The dialogue feels a bit looser. It definitely feels like a different tone, just very slightly, to what we normally see. It throws up something else I wanted to talk about, which was Peter Kay's involvement behind the scenes.
Okay.
When they came to make the show, and in fact for that Peter Kay thing, it's Peter Kay's production company, which is called Goodnight Vienna. It's his company that's making it officially. So he is the producer and obviously the writer and star. And in the first series, they have a director. It's someone that Peter Kay had worked with before on a little thing, and so he was like, oh, I'll work with someone I know.
I noticed that it was his name as director in the second series.
But in the second series, Peter Kay is the director. Yeah. But what's interesting on the DVD, there's lots of kind of behind the scenes stuff and all that stuff. And you see Peter Kay. He's sat behind the monitor watching what's happening. He's talking to one of the guest actors and kind of basically telling them what to do, that sort of thing. This is series 1. He's very much directing the piece. You know, he's in terms of the creative force, and like he's doing some directing. So I think when it came to series 2, maybe they just said, why don't you direct it? And Peter Kay himself has said he felt like he was under enormous pressure. You know, this was the show, they were putting his name on it, they were selling it on him. He's the producer, the writer, and the star. But also, then in the second series, he becomes director as well. And in the second series, there was a lot more kind of conflict between him and the other writers.
Well, look, why don't we talk about them now? Well, let's talk a bit more detail about Neil Fitzmaurice and Dave Spikey and the relationship, perhaps, that they all had. Yeah,
so as I said earlier, they kind of came together as kindred spirits who had met on the comedy circuit. Not necessarily like really amazing great mates, but, you know, friendly enough. And Peter Kay said, hey, people keep commissioning me to do things, help me. he and Dave Spikey had been working on something together, which was this little kind of a fake documentary thing where they were driving up the A6 and meeting wacky people. They asked Neil Fitzmaurice to play and write a kind of wacky character that they could meet and play it.
Yeah.
And so they kind of did that. It worked nicely and whatever. So he went to them and said, like, let's write stuff together. And for that PTK thing, I think they largely wrote it by email. You know, they said they wrote separately, and they would sort of send the ideas to Peter, and he would assemble them, really. But it was very much a joint effort, but not necessarily sat down together writing all the time. And then when it came to a bit later on, they got a bit more organised. They did sit down in an office and write together, but then it was mostly just sort of like they spend an hour discussing one specific like punchline. What's the funniest number?
Yeah.
Should it be 73 or 75? You know, what's funnier? You know, like these really kind of...
You can get a little bit buried in that.
Yeah, minutiae of these things. But let's talk about Dave Spikey. Let's start with him.
Have I remembered this right? Was Dave Spikey a doctor?
Not quite, but close. Yeah, he worked for the NHS, but he was a lab guy. He was, you know,
Okay.
He was the guy who would work your blood samples and stuff like that.
I see.
But yeah, certainly worked in hospital and did that for 30 odd years before he did
So how
Phoenix
old
Nights.
was he when Phoenix Nights was made?
50. 1951 he was
50?
born. Yeah.
Wow, okay. I thought he was one of those guys who looked old, you know, got the white hair, looked older than he was.
Yeah. Well, he looks all right for 50, didn't he?
He looks fine, but...
But yeah, he'd worked in the NHS for 30 years at that point, and he wrote comedy bits for the hospital panto that the staff would put on.
Yeah.
Had no particular desire to perform, but as we've seen before with some other people, someone dropped out, so he stepped in and did it. Once he got on stage, got some laughs, he was like, "Oh, this is good." So it kind of just planted the bug in his head. And people kept going, "Oh, you're funny, you are. You should do some stand-up."
And so was he like doing the working men's clubs then? Was he that kind of comedian? Or was he doing jongleurs?
Well, he started out in the late 80s, 1987, and at that point, alternative comedy was the big thing, but not in Blackburn, it wasn't. So, the way he did it was he entered a competition like Talent Trek, whatever it was. It wasn't actually Talent Trek, but, that sort of thing. Won, so had this very immediate success as a stand-up, so hadn't kind of gone out and fleshed his material out in the clubs. He just did his act and told a few funny stories. And then was like, "Oh, I can do this." Started doing it alongside his day job, and then went into the clubs and was like, "Oh," had to kind of learn again how to do it and how to work a different room to a different style. And didn't quite fit in. He wasn't an old school comic, but he wasn't like an off-the-wall alternative comedian either, bit before his time, I think.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, he was working for 10 years, just had a day job and worked club nights, earned a bit of money, but not enough to kind of go pro. And in fact, he quit his job in the NHS like 2 weeks before they started filming Phoenix Nights.
This was the catalyst.
This was the job that meant, okay, I'll quit. And he'd done quite a bit before that. He'd done a bit of TV presenting on, some sort of low-level stuff. He was just a nice personality. He was a good personality.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've heard Dave Spikey interviewed a few times and various things, and he does seem very similar to Jerry St. Clair. He's very chilled, very relaxed, and he seems like a similar sort of person.
Yeah, well, actually, we have a little personal connection here because our colleague Sol, who comes and joins us for our film
friend of the show,
sometimes, Sol Harris, he produced a film that was called Finding Fatima, and Dave Spikey was in it. He was sort of a little guest appearance. He did a couple of scenes. So I said to Sol, like, what was he like? How was he to work with? And he said he's absolutely lovely, really normal, down-to-earth guy. And
yeah, that checks out.
Sol said he was the best person to work with as from a producing point of view because he came in, gave it his all, didn't cause any problems, no fuss, then went home. Easy. Said apart from the fact that he was a vegetarian, there was no problems at all. So it sort of seems to be exactly what you would expect and want him to be.
Excellent. I saw him recently. I watched Alma's Not Normal, and so it was a recurring guest role in that.
Oh, yeah. But
that's the only thing I've seen him in for, I don't know, maybe since Phoenix Nights.
Well, I can tell you a bit more about what he did after. Mm-hmm. He actually did. Do you remember 8 out of 10 Cats when that started? Mm-hmm. He was one of the team captains for the first few series.
Yes, I do remember that. He became a stand-up that you saw on the telly from time to time.
Yeah. It's interesting him talking about that particular experience because he said it never suited me. I didn't feel comfortable. I spent the whole week like reading news stories, trying to think up material in case they asked about it, because it's a very topical kind of comedy show. And said it was just very stressful, and then like that cut and thrust world of Jimmy Carr panel shows, like it just wasn't quite his style. So he did it for a few years, and then he was kind of happy to not do it anymore, really, and that's obviously moved on. He was he presented Bullseye. He did that when they rebooted that.
Oh, do you know what? I'd forgotten that, but yes, I did know that, yes.
But in terms of sitcom, he's done writing, as well as acting. He did a show called Dead Man Weds, which was about a kind of small local newspaper.
Now, this is he became a little obsessed with local newspaper headlines, didn't he? I remember him, I maybe on Countdown or something, he was the guy who would read out funny newspaper headlines. Like, we didn't have Twitter. That was what we did.
Yeah, Dead Man Weds was a headline, and that was kind of his inspiration for this sitcom. Apparently, he and Peter Kay, before Phoenix Nights, they were working on, this was his idea, and Peter Kay helped him work on it a bit to try and pitch it to Granada, and it kind of didn't go anywhere. But then, a few years later, a bit more cachet, he dug that one back out of the drawer and sort of just on his own. Peter Kay isn't credited in it anyway, so I think he just wrote it all on his own. Yeah. I watched a little bit of that. What struck me was, it's his writing, and there's a lot of wordplay, a lot of kind of little, and there's a lot of that in Phoenix Nights, so I think it must be his influence. Dead Man Weds is a funny one, because it's not in front of an audience, it is just single camera, so there's no laugh track, and I think it's something that would really benefit from a laugh track.
Dr. Snoddy.
Present.
An in-depth look at hemorrhoids.
What's your problem now?
It's got a certain ring to it. Yeah. And where did you get this photo?
You don't want to know.
They're a bit like varicose veins, aren't they, Piles? Only up your bum.
It just has that style that it needs that, and the pacing is off. The writing is really nice. I actually quite like it, but it needs to be tightened up or just a bit faster or something. But I think they've deliberately gone for this kind of slow, leisurely countryside pace that doesn't really work. But interestingly, also in that, well, Johnny Vegas is in it, when he was still kind of a bit of an up-and-comer. He was already a name by then, but he's in it. And one of the regulars in it is Janice Connolly.
Holy Mary.
So, yeah, that's one of her, pretty much her only other real regular sitcom role after Phoenix Nights, because Janice Connolly is a stand-up comedian as well.
Janice Connolly is a stand-up comedian. I've seen her act, and it's pretty wild. It's completely at odds with the character she plays in Phoenix Nights.
The character she plays in stand-up is Barbara Nice, Mrs. Barbara Nice. And it's kind of what Holy Mary is, but then it subverts it within its own kind of performance.
Yeah.
So you can see why they've written that character for her, or brought her in for that character. And she's been doing that. She's been playing a middle-aged housewife for 35 years now. So, she's been doing that character for a while.
Is she still doing it?
I think so, yeah. She certainly was a few years ago, because she was on Britain's Got Talent. She got to the semi-finals of Britain's Got Talent with that character.
Really?
2019, I think that was.
I've been in a right pigging state since the audition. How are you? Are you, Amanda, love? Are you all right, love?
Good, my
I've been
darling.
TTU, Amanda, totally tizzed up. I'll tell you what, Harriet, thanks for laughing, loves the money and mother. I'll tell you what happened yesterday. I was doing 80 up a one-way cul-de-sac. I shouldn't even been driving that pigging bus.
Alan, I've never seen Britain's Got Talent, but what are the qualification rules? Like, surely having been on telly means you shouldn't be entering an entry-level talent show. Sure. What are the rules?
I don't know what officially it is, but it isn't like there's
You've been doing
no
that
pros.
act for 30 years.
I know for a fact that Britain's Got Talent will approach established acts and say, do you want to come on?
Really?
Yeah, maybe not very really well-established acts, but they will go to a fringe cabaret performer or something and say, this is a good act, come and do it, we'll put you on the telly. So, I know people who have been approached. Now, that doesn't mean any great success. They might just put you on and you're just one of the other acts, but I guess they want to just make sure they've got something on, and they're not just at the whims of public auditions. But yeah, I don't know. Britain's Got Talent as like a dog that can jump through hoops next to an impressionist.
Again, never seen it, but that's exactly what I think. It's that's life.
Yeah, which is fine. That's what it is.
It's not fine, it's shite.
Well, whatever.
Sorry. People like different things, and that's okay.
So anyway, yeah, that's Dead Man Weds was one of her other sort of regular roles with Dave Spikey. But he also did a show called Magnolia, well, a pilot called Magnolia. It was about decorators. And another show called Footballers' Lives that was about a pub football team, both just pilots that didn't go anywhere. But it does feel like he's written quite a bit, and perhaps they haven't taken off. But yeah, seems like a nice guy, seems like a lovely man.
What about Neil Fitzmaurice then? Because he's an actor, isn't he? I know he does stand up too, but you regularly see him popping up in things in relatively minor supporting roles. I feel like I've seen more of him over the last 20 years than most of the others.
Yeah, Neil Fitzmaurice, actor first, definitely, as opposed to most of the cast here. One of those kids, working class kid who always wanted to be an actor, but again was from a background where that wasn't a thing you could just easily get into. So had to really graft at it and struggled for 10 years, just not doing much in Liverpool.
Yeah.
He turned to stand-up comedy as a way to perform. It was just a way that he could have control, choose when and what he wanted to do, and all that sort of thing. So it was just a way to perform. But did pretty well. He was quite successful in a similar way to Dave Spikey. You know, he did talent competitions and did pretty well. But of a similar age to Peter Kay. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were in the same competition. It was in the Northwest regional final, and the judges couldn't decide between them, so they sent them both to the final. And so they went to the final, which I think was in Edinburgh, and they roomed together. They stayed together and drove up there together, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so they got to know each other, and then just off the back of that, they kind of started working together. But before Phoenix Nights, he wrote and starred in a low-budget British film called Going Off Big Time.
No, I've heard him talk about this. I as part of my research, and God knows I don't do any, my research for this, I listened to Neil Fitzmaurice talking to Richard Herring on his podcast, and he was talking about this film.
Yes. So he tells the story of how it got made, and we're sitcom, let's not get into all that, but it was, it was just the opportunity arose. He was the right place, right time, and he was like, right, yes, I'll do this, I'll make a script. And so it was a good break for him, not only to a great acting role, but he wrote it, and a real creative. He you'll have heard he talks about it as, like, in terms of a creative achievement, the biggest achievement of his career. More so than Phoenix Nights, because it was his thing. And I watched it. I saw it years ago.
Okay.
It was on BBC Two or something, and I watched it because I spotted Neil Fitzmaurice's name, and I was like, "Oh, hello." What's that? Neil Fitzmaurice.
How was it?
Phoenix Nights. Well, I couldn't have told you, but I watched it again the other day because I thought I was doing this research and I was like, I'm going to watch this. This is interesting. So I watched it again, and it's good. It looks better than its kind of budget would suggest as well. I think it works really nicely. There is something just missing about it, and I think it does come down to the writing.
Okay.
And it's about this gangster and it sort of tells the story of how he got into the life, and he sort of fell into it accidentally, so he's a good guy, really, kind of thing. But he turns to violence easily.
Right.
The obvious comparison is to compare it to something like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. Similar era, gangster kind of idea, admittedly Liverpool.
Around about the same time, yeah.
But it doesn't have that gloss and the sheen of unreality. It's a bit too gritty and real, and so it's a bit unpleasant as well. So it's just not as fun to watch. It's not as nice to watch, but it's perhaps more realistic. Yeah. But, a great kind of little career move for him. And Peter Kay is in it, in a very small, just little guest role.
So what was interesting, one thing that he was talking about with Richard Herring was this idea of being a jobbing actor. At that level, you've never really made it. And he was talking about how he'd been offered a part in The Crown, which was a character on the telly in the background of a scene where the Prince and Princess of Wales were arguing. and he was, he was basically saying, like, that's a real insult. I don't want to be the big one, but like that is a really entry level role. Yeah. And it kind of made me think, unless you are the star of the show, when have you made it? You've never really made it, have you?
Yeah, and like, just with that film specifically, they went to Cannes, it got sold, they did really, it did quite well, but it just didn't lead to anything else. It just kind of didn't. It just sort of, it was what it was.
Always looking for the next gig.
Yeah. And Neil Fitzmaurice, really off the back of the success of Phoenix Nights, launched his career, and like I say, he was an actor primarily, so went on to do lots of other things, and really does have a big place in our sitcom history because he's also in The Office.
And he's in Peep Show.
And he's in Peep Show, yeah, but he's in the very first episode of The Office, which was off the back of Phoenix Nights. He was...
Isn't he in the first scene of The Office?
Yeah, he is.
He is. Just him and Ricky Gervais.
And he was asked to audition off the back of Phoenix Nights, and he auditioned for Gareth, the Mackenzie Crook role.
Okay.
Obviously didn't get that, but they liked him enough that they went, do you want to, look, we've got a little part here if you want to do it, you think you'd be right. So obviously he just took what he could get. And then in Peep Show, similar story, he actually auditioned for Super Hands and obviously didn't get the part, but then when they came up with Jeff, they knew he was a good fit for that. And so he was a regular in that for the entire run pretty much, wasn't he? He was...
was the bridesmaid though?
Eyes Down, which I mentioned earlier, which was set in a bingo hall with Paul O'Grady and Sheridan Smith. And Edna Dore, Out of Time Gentlemen Please.
Oh, yeah. Did she do some swearing? Old lady swearing?
Oh, yeah. That's the entire character, and gets the biggest laughs of everything.
Of course. It's never not funny, an old lady swearing.
He's been in Benidorm as well. He was a regular in Mount Pleasant as well, which is more of a comedy drama than anything else. But and plenty of dramatic acting as well. He's done a bit of stage work here and there. You know, look,
a proper actor, but always, like I think he says himself, you're only as good as the last job. There's still no security even after 20 years in the business. He's still never sure where the next job's coming from. Okay, so look, we've talked about the other creatives then, Dave Spikey and Neil Fitzmaurice. Shall we go back to our episode?
Yes.
Shall we go back to the pearl necklace?
Right, yes.
So
that'll take her by surprise.
Yeah, we get the pearl necklace joke. He gives her a pearl necklace.
But they were my mother's then. Well, says, you know, they're no use to me. And she would have wanted you to have them.
You must miss her.
She's not dead. She lives up Stitch Mill Lane. So Borough.
It's such great timing.
Comic timing.
Yeah. And we have the whole bit where he's dancing to Marvin Gaye while they kiss. There's a very awkward kiss and all that.
Yeah. We now get what is my favourite scene in the whole of Phoenix Nights.
Yeah.
The stairlift scene.
So as he's slowly buzzing his way up the stairs, holding her hand as she's going up one step at a time.
It won't be long now. Just you wait. Things I'm going to do to you.
Now, we're no longer married, but I used to say that to my ex-wife a lot.
Well, that's a complete circle in that story in the two sentences.
But I tell you what though, I watched this scene again. I was really looking forward to it, and it made me laugh. But then I rewound it and watched it again with the Britcom pod eye. And he's looking directly forward, deadpan. He's not looking at her. And I was wondering if that was like an acting choice or he was just trying not to laugh. But it's so funny.
We then get them in bed, or on bed at least, and doing a very good job there, by the way, of making that look like a waterbed, because it's not.
Yeah.
But like they're doing a good job of moving
sort of
around a bit.
Aquamarine sound effect added on later.
Here's a specific reference. So Beverly says, oh, there's something I need to tell you. I haven't been totally honest with you. And Brian says, oh, you're not a bloke, are you? Oh, you didn't used to be a bloke like Haley.
Yeah, Haley Cropper from Coronation Street. I got that. I didn't even watch Coronation Street and I knew that.
What I found interesting about that is it's obviously a very specific reference at that time, but doesn't give any explanation. They don't say like Haley Cropper off of Coronation Street. It's just, you're not like Haley, are you?
But like I say, Alan, I never watched Coronation Street, and I understood that reference 20 years later.
Yeah. And I think, we have to acknowledge that Haley Cropper did a lot for the transgender movement in this country. I think
you're right. I don't know if you're joking or not, but I think you're dead right.
No, I'm very serious. Although, as far as I understand, that is a woman playing the role, isn't it? It's not actually a transgender person. But it just normalised the idea of someone being transgender, and they were just a normal person. Ultimately, it was a bit of a conflict in it. But it humanised that idea.
So she fesses up. Not that she used to be a man, but that she's actually working for the Social. And she was sent to spy on him to make sure he wasn't doing a dodgy claim.
Don't know if the DSS actually do this, send out honeypot tactics.
I don't think so. I don't think they're that well funded.
Exactly. But the idea being that she's been sent as a sort of espionage to find out if he's actually disabled. This is interesting because they kind of have to close this story off. So it's a bit of an abrupt ending. But basically what happens is she admits it, but she seems to be saying, but... That's why I got in touch with you.
She's fallen for him.
I've fallen for you now.
I think that's sincere.
Yeah, it seems to be, because she's got no reason to sort of fake that.
Yeah, but you're right, this is abrupt. Basically, he's not having any of it, and he chucks her out, and that's it. And it's incredibly abrupt.
And I quite like it. Brian's a man of principle. No, you lied to me. Get out. Don't look at me. Turn your face away. and basically we just sort of have a epilogue scene here where Jerry consoles him a little bit, and he's just Brian's back to his quite closed off. He's obviously feeling some emotions, but he's not going to show them.
She sends him a letter. Well, she sends back his pearl necklace. She writes him a letter, and he starts to read it, but then gets distracted and throws it in the bin, and that's it. Game over. Reset. Next episode. Again,
I think this is a great acting performance. What you really get here is that Brian cares, and he's not going to show it. And when he talks to Jerry, even Jerry, his closest sort of friend, confidant, he's not showing it. He's not going to let those emotions even enter his head. But we can very clearly see that there is still pain there.
Yeah.
Let's have a talk about the set and location and things. Yeah. This is filmed on location. I think that there's a little bit of studio work where they recreated some club.
Yeah.
I think. But it's mostly filmed on location, the exterior location, which is an actual club. It looks like a crappy northern working men's club, and it is. It's a great location because it just looks so desolate. There's kind of barren car park right in front of it. I think that's a great location, and some of the interiors were filmed there as well. But then, like the Tony Knowles suite or whatever is like in a different club. So they've had to kind of patchwork a couple of clubs together like that.
The Tony Knowles suite, by the way. That's brilliant.
Because
if our listeners don't know, Tony Knowles is a snooker player in the 80s. But he was like the world number 7. Like the Dennis Taylor suite or the Steve Davis suite would be a less funny, but a more appropriate name. The Tony Knowles suite. I'm wondering if Tony Knowles came and opened it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the sort of level.
I think that's what it is.
Just to come back to our kind of armchair psychology of Peter Kay. One thing I noticed in the outtakes particularly, and in the back behind the scenes, this atmosphere, I don't think this is Peter Kay specifically, but it's probably just of the time and of the comedy circuit. There's a real breaking balls kind of attitude. You make a mistake, you slip a line up, and they pounce and take the piss. Or, your hair looks very slightly thin, and so they just call you Baldy Bouncer for the next day. And then they write a character where you're playing it, and they write it into the character that they're calling you Bald because that's what they were doing to you. It's a real male, and I think it's a comics attitude as well. You dish it out, but you can take it as well. But just in terms of our armchair psychology of Peter Kay, you see him like knocking people down. You make a mistake, he'll make sure you know it, and it's all kind of done in good humour, but that's a grating, abrasive way to live your life, and it does wear people down. And I'm not saying that's Peter Kay specifically. Like I say, I think it's kind of the atmosphere of the time.
Yeah.
But it's worth noticing because, like I said, there was a lot of pressure, and particularly in the second series, they fell out. Peter Kay fell out, basically, with Neil Fitzmaurice and Dave Spikey, who were the other two main creatives. And I think the other actors, the likes of a Justin Morehouse or something, he just does what he's told and he's not getting involved. But because Neil Fitzmaurice and Dave Spikey were the writers as well, they obviously felt more of an ownership on it. They felt like they had more of a say. And all of a sudden, Peter Kay is directing, producing, and editing. He was in the edit suite. And that has definitely been his MO since. He writes it, he directs, and he's involved right down to the kind of the last minutiae.
Yeah.
And I think it tells in the product. He does produce a very fine product.
Yeah.
But it meant that there was a bit of conflict between him and the other creatives, and Peter Kay has never spoken about it. You read his book where he's talking about this stuff particularly, and he doesn't really mention anything like that. But the others, I've seen them speak about it, but in very... particularly Neil Fitzmaurice, he's talking about it, 20 years later, and he's very sanguine about the whole thing. He's kind of saying, we fell out, and it's a shame, because we all had a great time on it, and we worked together really well, and it's a shame it ended that way. But I wonder how raw it was at the time, but 20 years of hindsight, and someone who's, done a lot in their life, and they can kind of look back and go, that was just one moment in my life. And certainly they've worked together since. So it's not like they completely... But that relationship soured.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about the Peter Kay git factor, how much of that is that? And how much of that is just that he's a control freak, shall we say, but in a good way? He wants to make the best product possible, and there's a lot of pressure on him.
It's his name above the title, isn't it?
Yeah. And so at what point do you go, well, no, I'm making this decision now. I've decided to do this.
Yeah.
And part of that was a potential third series.
Oh, okay.
Peter Kay, his production company, had been commissioned for 2 series, as in after the first was a success. So they did a second series of Phoenix Nights, and in theory there would be a 3rd series. And Peter Kay made the decision to do Max and Paddy's spin-off instead.
Just him and Paddy McGuinness.
And Peter Kay, as the producer, made that decision.
I see.
You know, I think if they wanted to and everything was going fine, there's more material here. You could have got a 3rd series out of this, problem. There could have been a film spin-off, whatever. And there has, even in more recent years, like 5 years ago, talk of that sort of thing happening. And it's just not going to happen now. But, you know, what we did get was Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere.
Well, look, my opinion of Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere is that I didn't like it. I think I watched the first 2 episodes and then never watched any more of it. Should I revisit it? What do you think?
Well, as it happens, I rewatched it quite recently. Not for any specific reason, I just fancied it. And it is written by Peter Kay and Patrick McGuinness, I believe, is a credited writer, although I don't know if that's a 50-50
Additional dialogue, Alan. Additional dialogue.
Sure there's a... But, you know...
Ding dang do.
Let's talk about Paddy McGuinness in a minute. But it's interesting because I think it works on a lot of levels. I find it perfectly enjoyable. But it's way more meandering. I mean, they're on the road. That's kind of the whole point. They haven't got a situation. It's just those two and they do different things. But it's too meandering. So, like, at one point, they end up in prison. And so there's the prison episode. And it's very kind of Porridge-esque. And, you know, it's fun. And then they're out of prison the next episode, so it's kind of, and it's just a bit too bitty. But there is there's a running story that goes through it. It's missing something. It's just not honed. It's not tight, and it hasn't got the structure.
Well, it's missing an ensemble cast as well, isn't it? Because they're moving on and seeing different people every week. You know, you haven't got the warmth of the community there.
But it's fun. I enjoyed it. It's still got a lot of the ingredients you want. And let's talk about Paddy McGuinness. I know it's easy to hate Paddy McGuinness, but I like him. I'm coming out Team Paddy.
Well, okay, so he is. You know what I said earlier about Peter Kay, which is the material is not all that. It's just that he's a great personality and performer. Well, I think Paddy McGuinness is that, but even more so. Like he's like a really charismatic guy, and charisma goes a long way. But that's kind of all he's got. And it's enough. It's enough to present that dating program. You know, that's fine.
Yeah, and let's you know, he's not done a lot of acting since this, so he's not even like pretending to be an actor really. He's done a fair bit of stand-up comedy, and it's not amazing, but it's solid. It's not like he just tells his stories and he does a few gags, and it's fine. He's got the personality to hold that up, and that takes some doing to get up on a stage and do that, you know. But yeah, he's found his kind of home as a personality, as a presenter. You know, he does Top Gear and stuff like that now, doesn't he? But look, he was a friend of Peter Kay's from childhood. He's very much coattail ridden his way up there. He married a former Miss Liverpool who's 15 years younger than him. He lives in a multi-million-pound mansion. He's got 3 kids. Fair play to him, I say.
Are you suggesting there's jealousy involved in the criticism of Paddy McGuinness?
No, I'm saying he's living the dream, and good for him.
Yeah, I can't knock him. Again, charisma goes a long way.
Yeah, I'm all right with him. I don't watch anything he's in, so perhaps if I did, if I watch telly more often, we'd bother.
Yeah, maybe. What about after Max and Paddy? What about Peter Kay? Why don't we bring us up to date with his work post Phoenix Nights? He seemed to disappear for a while, didn't he? He
does that. He seems to go away for a few years and then sort of crop back up. And I think in our comparison to Ronnie Barker, we haven't seen the output of the kind of iconic things that are going to last the test of time in the same way. And I think there's reasons for that. But I also think there's plenty more to come. Peter Kay is 50 still. He's still young, yeah. And I think, as we see in his character comedy, he plays older characters very well anyway. Yeah. So I don't think we need to worry about that too much. I think there's a potential for another classic sort of sitcom character from him.
Okay.
Whether that will happen or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about what else he's done. So after Max and Paddy, you know, he's doing stand-up. He is still the biggest name in British comedy at this point. He did briefly actually play. He was in The Producers, you know, the musical Producers.
Oh yes.
But other than that, hasn't done like much musical theatre, which I think was probably a good fit for him anyway. But I don't know how good his singing voice is. But he loves to sing, as we saw in. He did that weird the thing that was a spoof of like Britain's Got Talent and.
You're going to say where he was dragged up as a Northern Irish female singer, right?
Yeah. He loves doing the Northern Irish. because it's his mum's accent, so he can do
Not
that.
even Irish.
Yeah, and that was like, it wasn't a sitcom, it wasn't a series, it was just a weird kind of standalone thing where it was a fake talent show.
Yeah.
It had a completely ridiculous title.
I seem to think that's where I parted company with him. I tried watching that, but it just wasn't for me. I never watched the talent shows that it was spoofing, so I didn't really get it.
Yeah, I see that. It would be interesting if he hadn't had success quite so quickly and had to sort of work his way around a bit. Maybe that would have changed things. I don't know. But I would love to see more of him, basically, is what I'm saying.
Something else I really enjoyed Peter Kay in was Cradle to Grave, you know, the Danny Baker written sitcom.
Yeah, so Cradle to Grave, based on Danny Baker's childhood. He played the dad. Peter Kay played Danny Baker's dad. Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I know someone who was in that.
Oh, okay.
Frankie Wilson, who played the older brother, so not the Danny Baker character, but the older brother, who's a teenager.
Oh, you were in a play with him, weren't you? I remember. I'm looking at his face now. I remember that play you were in. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a play with him last year, so I messaged him. I said, "Oh, you've worked with Peter Kay. You got any good stories?" Like, I said, "Look, if you want to slag him off, I won't drop your name." so as you can tell, he didn't slag him off. I said, like, what was it like working with him? And so I got a little bit of insight. But basically, first thing, obviously, Cradle to Grave is set in South London. That's where Danny Baker grew up. But it was filmed in Manchester to accommodate Peter Kay, because Peter Kay wanted to be near his family. And that's a big factor in Peter Kay's career. He is extremely family orientated, to the point where he originally went to uni in Liverpool and couldn't handle it because he was too far away from his home.
Too far from home.
And he's very family orientated. Got married around 2002, around sort of Phoenix Nights times. Got a child. At least one child, I'm not sure. Quite private about his personal life, so I don't know that much.
I don't know anything about his personal life. Yeah. You've just said that, and I'm thinking, no, I know nothing about his family.
Well, to take me back to more points about reading his autobiography, I read his autobiography that was specifically, this is my childhood. It goes from his childhood up until, I just won Northwest Comedian of the Year in my third stand-up gig. Yeah. I've read that, and I don't feel like I know who Peter Kay is. In the same way in his stand-up material, he talks about, my dad used to do this, didn't you? What's my mum doing that for? And that's all based on his real family and people around him. But it doesn't feel like you're getting any insight into him or who he is at all. And having read his autobiography, which, to be fair, he wrote in 2006, he was at the peak of his fame. It's not like when you write something when you're 70 and kind of sod it, I'll say whatever I want kind of vibe. It was a cash-in book about, get my material out there. So there's a lot of his stand-up material in the book. There's a lot of sitcom material in there. It's kind of repeated.
It's not a personal expose.
It feels like someone mining their personal life for comedy material rather than a kind of open expression of...
I get you.
You know what? Fair enough. Why should you turn your private life out? But it's quite a frustrating experience to read it, for me, trying to kind of get a handle on someone. And even when I read one of his later books, which is just done recently, which was about his TV work, reading the bit about Phoenix Nights, and again, it's very kind of little insight into the process or there's a little bit about talking about how he was under a lot of pressure and all that, but he does not want to let that stuff out. He does not want to let people in. And, like I say, fair enough. But then, I don't know, don't write 3 autobiographies. But I think that has had a greater effect on his career in the sense that he doesn't want to be away from his family. And so he's not even going down to London to do any long-term work. It's like, I'm doing this work where I am or I'm not doing it. And he has the money and the power to be able to make those choices. And that, fair enough, right? But that does mean we're not getting as much out of him as a completely, outsider. I would like to have more material from him. I would like to see him working more.
Yes, I get what you're saying.
The other aspect of that is if you have built your career on kind of mining reality and the working class people around you, when your life changes considerably because you come into a bit of money and you're a success, those influences change. Those things around you change. And you have to be able to roll with that and change the way you do it or not. I don't know. What do? You just repeat the same material. Ricky Gervais is a kind of a similar example. The Office is based on I've worked in offices. Don't you remember people like this? And then, 20 years later, Ricky Gervais lives a totally different life now.
He's just doing observational comedy about arguments on Twitter now, because that's all he experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Peter Kay is clever enough to realise that and not do it. but that means he's not doing anything.
I get what you're saying.
One last thing I want to talk about before we close off.
Yeah.
There was one little bit of legacy here. I sort of talked about they tried to do a third series, or there've been talk of it, and it sort of never quite happened. Circumstances weren't quite right, whatever. It's probably too late now. Mm-hmm. But in 2015, I think it was, they did a live show. Phoenix Night live show for about 3 weeks. They did 3 weeks at, was it the Manchester Apollo? Probably was. At one location, and it was for comic relief. So all the main actors did it for no money, and they raised £5 million.
I've never heard of this.
Well, I hadn't either until I researched this. It was definitely a relatively small thing. It was just the live show. They recorded it, because I've seen some clips, but the clips were just promotional material. And like, Google it, you'll find it's a 3-minute trailer, basically. And that's the only footage I've seen. Based on that, it appears to be a kind of highlights reel of the show. It's just like, oh, remember this bit? Archie Kelly singing Britney Spears in a school uniform. But I think a lot of the actors they got their 5 minutes to do a bit of stand-up, perhaps in character, but rather than as themselves. But, I think everyone had their own bit. And then they recreated some scenes and that sort of thing. And Ted Robbins, who we haven't talked about, but is a kind of
we haven't talked. Den Perry, the fat pig.
Yeah, Den Perry, their rival. Interestingly, Peter Kay wrote that. He wanted Bernard Manning for it.
Ah, that checks out.
Makes sense,
would be
doesn't
perfect
it?
Casting.
Went to meet Bernard Manning and kind of spent an afternoon with him, and kind of came away from that going, this guy's in quite bad physical condition. I don't think he could do it. And also actually trying to deal with him on a kind of personal basis, like trying to get a performance out of him, is going to be difficult. So anyway, they got Ted Robbins to do it. Ted Robbins was in the live show, and on the opening night, on stage, had a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And they carried on. The show must go on, but obviously he's still with us. He didn't die or anything. But so that happened during the live show. So that was the main newsworthy thing. But yeah, I guess they sold it out, and what are you going to do? You don't need to promote it if it's sold out, do you?
Well, yeah, quite. I tell you what. This experience of talking about this, I'm leaving this conversation feeling much more positive towards Peter Kay than I came into it. He's done a good job of defending him. That's maybe not the right word. Championing him. You've done a good job of championing him.
I think there's just nuance there, isn't there? I think he's closed himself off, and I think becoming famous was probably not what he wanted. There's obviously a lot of downsides to that, and so in terms of stand-up as well, he kind of occasionally will crop up and do stand-up, but he did a stand-up tour that didn't tour because he just did 34 nights at the Manchester Apollo or whatever it was, because he was like, well, I don't want to travel the country doing this, I'll do it here and I'll sell it out. So
you come to me and people will. So yeah, fair
and
enough.
Now he announced a tour, and then a month later kind of cancelled it, and he said, it's a family thing, I don't want to talk about it, please leave me in privacy. And they did. But he's now touring, but it's going to take him 3 years to do this tour, because he's just doing, all right, this Saturday I'm going over to Southampton, and then Friday I'll do Portsmouth, and then I go home for the week. He doesn't want to be out on the road for 6 months and not be with his kids or whoever it is he wants to be with.
And that's reasonable, isn't it?
We say that's fair, but it feels like it means we're not getting as much Peter Kay as perhaps I would like.
Well, tough.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as we wrap up, let's bring it back to the actual show.
Yes.
I loved Phoenix Nights at the time, and I have to say, this is the first time I've watched it. I watched all 12 episodes. The first time I watched it for years, and I loved it again. Yeah. It held up, it made me laugh in all the same places. The dialogue is brilliant, the timing is excellent, the characters are well drawn. I loved it. And, I dare say we haven't really got many listeners who haven't watched it and loved it. But, if you haven't watched it for 10 years, I would encourage you to go and find it and watch it all again, because it really does hold up.
Absolutely, I concur with that. I think it's really brilliant. It's extremely funny. As well, the one thing I took from rewatching it that perhaps I didn't appreciate previously is Peter Kay's acting. He's just such a great comic actor. And, as much as Dave Spikey, what he's doing, I'm not going to say Dave Spikey's a great actor, but it's a perfect character. He's written it for himself, whatever. It's great. But there's some of the things Peter Kay are doing is like really genuinely top quality acting, and I really want to see him do more stuff, like proper acting. Not even necessarily like dramatic acting, but just more that's acting and not just, clowning around on stage, which is fine. He does that well as well. But yeah. I want to see his open all hours, not literally, but I want to see another sitcom that is going to see him through his 60s, his 50s and 60s, playing the father of a family or something, I want to see that.
Well, great. Thanks, Alan, and thank you everyone for listening. Do you want to tell us where our listeners can find us on the socials and so on?
Yes, we are at BritComPod on Instagram. We are on Facebook. If you search for British Sitcom History Podcast, you'll find us there.
Great. And what are we doing next, Alan?
Oh, our next episode was by Listener Poll.
Oh.
You stuck it up on the old Twitter and whatever else.
I did. So we put up a series of obscure-ish 1970s sitcoms. And so the winner was, Alan?
The Other One, with Richard Briers and Michael Gambon.
I'm quite interested to watch this. I've never seen it, and to be honest, I've never really heard of it either. But obviously Richard Briers is a comedy legend. Michael Gambon, more of a straight actor, so I don't think I've ever seen him in a comedy, so I'm quite looking forward to this.
Yeah, I've never seen either, so it's going to be a nice, interesting one to take on.
We will see you next week to start our discussion of that. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye!
Bye!